Awesome. Well, good evening and welcome to New Space Chicago. Thank you all for coming on. I guess we have a small crowd tonight, but it is what it is. My guess is that everybody's leaving town for the 4th of July weekend. Nobody wants to be here for NASCAR. So we are New Space Chicago. We are a community of space enthusiasts who think that there ought to be a space industry in Chicago. There's really no reason why there shouldn't be a space industry here. We have a number of world-class universities and research institutions. We have a highly trained technical workforce. We are a global financial center. We're a transportation hub for the country. We are a manufacturing center with a vibrant manufacturing economy. All of these are elements that are important to support a space industry. And the most important thing in order to have the space industry is people who are interested in space. So thank you all for coming out. Really appreciate your interest. We have periodic networking events, so this is one of them. This is actually the last event before our summer break. So coming up in the fall, we'll have some more events, and I'll address that in a moment. Just a quick shout out to our sponsors. First of all, MHub, the lovely folks who are responsible for the space that we are in. MHub is a manufacturing innovation center and startup incubator. You might think of it as a maker space for entrepreneurs. It's an amazing space. It supports quite a number of companies in the manufacturing, quite a number of startups in the manufacturing sector. And my company, Orbital Transports, is one of them. So it's a great place for people who want to create products out of create products out of atoms. Secondly, Metropolitan Brewing sponsors the beer that we've been drinking. So they are a local craft brewery and one of the actually oldest craft breweries in Chicago. Started over almost 15 years ago now. And then Orbital Transports is my company. We are a space logistics company currently focused on delivering small satellite missions. Upcoming events. Next speaker event will be in the fall. So as I mentioned, we're now about to enter the summer break. The speaker and date are still to be determined, but we expect to have the next event in September. So hopefully you can all turn out for that. And then in November, we have the Student Space Congress. This is actually a virtual event that we started during the pandemic, but will continue to be a virtual event. It's focused on students who are doing space-related projects. It doesn't have to be engineering. It could be art, it could be law, it could be policy, it could be any number of things as long as it's related to space. And the goal is to get them exposure to people in industry and some support for what they're doing in the space industry. And as I said, that's in November. New Space Chicago is a nonprofit organization. We have a couple of different sponsorship levels, so if you find what we're doing interesting, we encourage you to donate to the organization. There is event-based sponsorship and also ongoing annual-based sponsorship, so we would appreciate that. So let's get to the main event. Tonight we are going to be talking about space and blockchain. Let me introduce Steve Wasco, who will be our moderator for the evening. Steve, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dave. I'd like to introduce our two panelists for the evening who know much more about blockchain than do I, so I'm here to learn just as I think everyone here is here to learn. So Brian Peterson, and Zach Zeurcher. So I'm going to start off with an introduction, let both Brian and Zach talk about their backgrounds a little bit, and then have a set of questions. And the most fun aspect is we have questions from the audience. So I'll start with Brian, introducing Brian. Brian's actually the treasurer of the Space Commodities Exchange, which is not actually a blockchain-oriented business this yet, but Brian's been a quant in the Chicago area of finance, actually national finance world for the past 20 years, and has traded cryptocurrencies and has probably about as much experience in blockchain as probably anyone here from that exposure. So it's great to have someone with Brian's expertise. And Zach is the founder and CEO of Gravity Inc., which is a space services company that's connecting private space companies to large commercial brands. So Brian, why don't you start off with a little bit about your background and your exposure to blockchain, distributed ledger, perhaps through the crypto world, and also through some of the other quantitative stuff.
Sure. So I'm a quant. I'll start there. And I'm a trader. I run a number of different trading firms primarily. That's our primary business. I'm also involved in the Space Commodities Exchange, which is about bringing commodities, traditional commodities trading, futures style trading to the new space world. And in my not so copious free time, I'm on the faculty at the University of Illinois and the University of Washington, where I teach algo trading. In the blockchain space, one of our prop firms, proprietary trading firms where we trade our money, not client money, is predominantly in the cryptocurrency space. So we're trading our own money. We're also trading with other counterparties over the counter in that space. And as it starts to relate to space, we're going to talk about more as we go along. But we've been doing stuff in the crypto world now for almost a decade at various firms and now my own firms.
Very good, thank you. Zach, I want to do a quick introduction.
Cool. My name is Zach Zeurcher, and I am a emerging tech and industry entrepreneur. So prior to Gravity, which we work with on Gravity, we work with space companies to help kind of develop their sponsorship programs and marketing programs, and with commercial brands to help them get into space and find a reason really why they're going into space. By tying in their marketing goals, marketing message, and business development goals into an activation or a reason to have a payload. So prior to Gravity, I worked on a few tech projects. One was a B2B software for package approval processes. We worked with Danaher, and we built a software platform for them, for their company ESCO to use as their own product, and a B2C software for a little app for reservations. So, background is, just getting into these new emerging technologies and industries. And then around crypto and blockchain, one of our projects that we're working on that is Web3, utilizing blockchain, is called Terraformer Space Adventures. And what Terraformer Space Adventures is, it's a Web3 membership-based social platform around space. So basically, we try to stay away from the word NFT because it's, has bad, just bad PR. So, but basically what this is, it's a NFT verified membership for members to buy, trade, and sell to be able to access our platform. And the platform itself is an area for people to talk with space enthusiasts around the world, whether it be through messaging or video. We have messaging and video on the platform. But the real cool thing there is we're working with actual space companies and the individuals and their missions there to offer the members a unique, experiences and unique interactions with these space companies. So, I don't want to go too much longer. I feel like I'm going too long, but we'll eventually hit more on what that is. So, yeah, I don't want to take the whole time.
We'll spend some very quality time going through that. a little bit. I did want to start kind of at a higher level, before diving into the space and commercial space applications, and talk about blockchain, distributed ledger as a technology, and kind of the higher level, what kinds of value can bring out. Industries that have been at the forefront of applying distributed ledger, blockchain technologies have been traditional ones like finance, where Brian has been working in it, manufacturing, logistics. So I'll start the first question to Brian. It's like, given your experience in the crypto trading and blockchain world, and some of the either studying or other thinking about it that you've done, how should we think about some of the broad benefits, the problems that can be solved with this kind of technology? I know that's it's a pretty huge question given the range of things that can be addressed, but how do you think about that?
Well, I guess I'll put my professor hat on for a second there.
That may be the best way to start, right?
and I think that we can start with the technology itself, right? The blockchain itself is a distributed ledger, or a series of distributed ledgers that use cryptographic, thus the crypto signatures, to sign the transactions. So you're using a hashed public-private key signature to sign the transaction. So one of the first places that this has value is just in the ledger itself. That by putting something onto the ledger, it's a public record, and that the transactions have to be signed in order to move on the ledger. So there are more efficient distributed databases. Crypto blockchain is not the most efficient distributed database. There are more efficient signing algorithms. It's not the most efficient or even secure signing algorithms that are available. But it's kind of the technology that worked, right? VHS beat Betamax long ago, and it's much the same way. And then there are better technologies, but this one worked, and it's there, and it's trillions of dollars large, so we can't ignore it. Ignoring it would be wrong. When I was first approached to do crypto trading at one of the trading firms I was at, I said to the owners of the firm, I said, "Why? It's too small. I don't care. Like I'm one of the largest. My team is one of the largest market makers at the CME. We don't care about crypto. Crypto trades less in a month than we trade in an hour. Why do I care?" But crypto obviously won. It's obviously become that in the space. So it's gotten much bigger. It's now valued at multiple trillions of dollars. So that's one case. It's just that the ledger itself is a place to do things. Another case is that the smart contracts that these blockchains allow for, they allow for some really interesting things. Like when you buy a book and you sell that book, the author doesn't get paid for your what's called second sale. So with a smart contract, we can build into the contract from day one that the creator will always get paid for the second and the third and the 100th sale. So I think that's a very reasonable case where we're going to see big use cases in the real economy, right? How does this all fit into the real economy? Another one is payments. I was talking with some of you earlier about the fact that, as Americans, we don't really care. My credit card works. I can spend US dollars pretty much anywhere in the world. I mean, and it's not really a problem for me to be in a dollar-based economy with a US credit card and US dollars in my pocket. I can go anywhere in the world and spend those. But for most of the rest of the world, it's not nearly so easy to buy and sell things with a common method of exchange, or to move money across borders. It's actually very, very hard to move money across borders, most places outside of the US or Europe. So crypto solves that problem. And then there are other bigger problems that could make traditionally illiquid assets like real estate trusts, like really large bond offerings that are corporate bonds are notoriously illiquid. You have to call one of the 5 desks that deals in those corporate bonds, and then you might be able to get it done. So there's a very real option for these large illiquid assets to become traded on a smaller level and to be more liquid overall. I'm sure I've forgotten a few, but the thing I always try to come back to is how does this impact the real economy? Because if it doesn't impact the real economy, it's just printing internet money, and it doesn't matter.
Well, that's actually a very key point. One of the things that you said that the kind of the foundational aspects of the technology maybe individually aren't the best, but in combination. But there's especially the aspect of the decentralized ledger, where it doesn't have the common centralized authority that is covering it, which seems to me to be one of the most powerful aspects, especially as it applies to a space-oriented, space-based economy, because space almost, well, by definition, is borderless. You're not domiciled in any one place if you're dealing with something, for example, in orbit, or certainly on the moon or interplanetary. But before we dig into that, one other thing is people who are involved in commercial space activities, there's probably some areas that are not specific to the space type of work that they may be exposed to from a distributed ledger technology standpoint. It could be through raising capital, as you indicated about capital flows. It could be IP management, supply chain, or smart contracts, for example. Zach, I don't know if you've got some thoughts about some of those, not specific to space, but someone who works in the space business like you do, that you might get exposed to that.
Yeah. Okay. Could you, or not specific to space, is some use cases I see that aren't specific to space, or how?
What ways that someone who potentially works in a space-oriented business might be take advantage of some of the benefits of blockchain, but that aren't necessarily specific. A lot of different industries, people raise capital. In a lot of different industries, people have intellectual property that they want to protect. So there's some kind of core things that
Yeah. So I think one of them could potentially be on how an organization, a project, an initiative, or a goal is ran using a decentralized, autonomous organization. And so what that is, it's basically like a business structure, but it's ran, decentrally through a consensus mechanism and a governance that's created, by the founders of that DAO. So, that could be something where it's okay. Hey, we're going to have an initiative for, let's say, terraforming Mars. Okay, so that's the overall goal, but instead of having it as like a registered LLC or a C corp with a board structure and that type of traditional hierarchy, it's a bunch of people cooperating from around the world, continuously deciding where that how that goal is going to be carried out. So that's one way potentially for space, and that's being used not in space on a lot of environmental initiatives. So that's one way. Another potential that I kind of see this in space is, and that could be, this could be a part of a DAO as well. Would be like, let's say it's a situation where we have amount of stakeholders in the DAO, and the purpose of the DAO is to go and mine, some kind of mineral, maybe on the moon or on Mars. Okay, and this would have to be a little bit further down in space with the development of the space economy and infrastructure on, let's say, the moon. But one of those could be that you have, let's say, they're mining an area and they have, they found X amount of this rare space material. So what could then be done using this blockchain is, let's say on the robot there's some kind of camera sensor or some other type of sensor that verifies what the mineral is and then the amount. Okay. And so then you'd use something like, like chain link, which takes data off chain, on chain, and then verifies that into like an ERC 1155 contract, where each of those different the holders of all those different the owners of the DAO receive whatever their stake is from that commodity. So then they would receive, through that ERC 1155 badge smart contract, autonomously the ownership and whatever value that is to those commodities that this lunar rover they found, or that for their DAO that they found. So you really have to reconceptualize how organizations and organizations work, and really kind of how we go about our day-to-day, with blockchain. If blockchain does become that predominant force, then it's really a way you have to have a big mind shift, a shift in your mindset.
So one of the really interesting things there is that in the crypto world, there are a bunch of people who are just running out and doing it. They're creating the token, they're issuing the thing, and they're kind of ignoring all of the law that goes around it, right? And that sort of works sometimes if your goal is to print money and run away. Where it fails is if you're trying to really build something, right? And so the thing about DAOs is I've seen both good ones and bad ones. And the bad ones are just groups of people who are saying, I'm going to create this thing, and I'm going to sell a bunch of ownership, and it's going to have some rules, and it's going to be, and it's completely independent of all of the government structures. Well, nothing's independent of all the government structures, right? But what I see in the ones that are thinking a lot more carefully about this is they are typically organizing first as a trust company. So they're first creating a trust. Real estate trust or a precious metals trust, and then they are saying in the organizing documents of the trust that the operation of the trust will be governed by a DAO.
Can you guys clarify what a DAO is?
A DAO is a distributed autonomous organization. So the idea is that there are rules that are defined in the smart contract that define how that organization makes decisions. And so your ownership of a share by a token, you own a governance token that allows you to use that token to vote, basically, about proposals, typically, or about resolutions, depending on what organization we're talking about. And so just like regular corporate governance, you would vote your shares. It's really no different in that sense. You're voting your tokens instead of voting your shares, but you're using those together to make decisions. So the ones of these that I see that are well organized, they're typically organizing as a Montana trust or a Swiss trust, or they're organizing as a traditional trust company, and then saying the trust will be governed by the governance token votes, just like you would vote shares.
Now what's interesting there, and I think about it, one thing that's very important to space entrepreneurs, but also to other entrepreneurs in other technology fields, is things like intellectual property protection. And there's something about the distributed authority organizations that would also be important for IP management, which is how do you enforce ownership? So so that almost shows that they're, like you said, you're never going to fully escape governments, because generally that's where people go to do enforcement.
Right. What's the court? What's the court that you take this to?
So what have you seen? How has that been implemented or organized in these situations?
So in intellectual property, we're seeing smart contracts used as registries, fundamentally where you register ownership of certain things, or where the autonomous organization owns certain assets. And those could be real estate, or they could be intellectual property. It doesn't really matter. They own something. And because the organization has legal authority, it could actually take action to enforce that ownership?
I can see there being a lot of law being developed in that. I kind of wish Charles were here tonight. Participate. Charles Mudd, who's involved with New Space Chicago, is one of the real leading space lawyers, basically internationally. Anyway, so I want to move into the commercial space applications of that, as we've talked a little bit about the broader aspects of the technology. There seems like some segments in commercial space are kind of obvious beneficiaries, potentially, of distributed ledger technology, communications, and validation of the data that is being transmitted, remote sensing, and validation of the imagery or other sensing devices, on-orbit operations, tracking assets, for example. You can see this being a kind of natural use of blockchain type of technology. You started talking, Zach, about some of the initiatives you see. So why don't you, in the more specific to commercial space work, why don't you expound on that, talk about terraformers and some of the other stuff you see?
Yeah, absolutely. So, do we want to start on terraformers or more on some of the other things that are actually happening right now in space?
Why don't you start with terraformers, since you're close to that,
Okay.
and then I think through that you've been exposed to some of the other initiatives that have gone on. So
Yep.
talk about those
Right, yeah.
in that context.
Yep, exactly. So, as I mentioned before, Terraformers is a social network around space utilizing blockchain technology to verify membership ownership and for people to be able to exchange these memberships. So, Terraformers was, one for the holder, you get these really cool space experiences, and these space experiences are verified again through blockchain. Let's say you're invited to go down to watch one of our partners launch a payload from like Cape Canaveral. So that's you're verified that you get to go to this event through this blockchain technologies, as an example called redeemable traits. Let's say you're Columbia. One of your Columbia is a sponsor on the Intuitive Machines lunar lander, and they're putting their new jacket technology on there, and on the lunar lander as a sponsorship program. So if you're a holder, then you basically you can. It's a way to interact with space companies and sponsors, all that.
And,
Right?
and just to be clear, Columbia, the sportswear jacket
yes.
company, the one where the mob is the person in the commercial, not the country.
Yes, not the country. So there's all these really cool things going on in space, but these companies who are doing these mission sponsors, who are buying payload, doing these things in space, don't actually have a channel to really find a target audience and market to, outside of having a major marketing initiative and spend outside of the spend that is already happening with the payload space. So there's all these cool things going on. A lot of people don't know about it, and there's not really a place that has aggregated all these space enthusiasts that would be worth using as a channel to market for these usage. So on that side, the space companies and the payload buyers and mission sponsors of the space company have this channel to be able to interact with, and then on the on the membership side, you get to do these really cool things like have a jacket, the new Columbia Omni Heat Tech jacket that's insulating the Intuitive Machines lunar lander, sent to you, or like receive a discount on that. Let's say we're working with LifeShip, for example. So one of our beta, one of the beta members is going to receive, the kit to put your DNA on their time capsule on the next. I think it's the Intuitive Machines lunar lander is the one that's going to be on. The rest of everyone else gets to say, hey, well, look what's going on with LifeShip. This is really, for LifeShip, the members say, hey, this is really cool, get a talk with the founder, then the ones who don't receive like the free kit, get a discount to buy the kit. Then let's say with geometric space, and this is interesting because they're really utilizing a lot of blockchain. They're sending up the Doge 1 satellite, the one, I'm not sure if the one Elon tweeted about, but it's a display board that's going to be a lunar satellite. So it's going to be orbiting the moon with a display board on there, and they're utilizing blockchain to be able to send, for people to send imagery up to this little display board, so you can snap a little picture of whatever you sent up and say, hey, there's whatever I'd sent up there, and it's orbiting the moon. So, again, our Terraformers members get to interact with that, tweet about that, be that target audience. Some people get to do that for free, but again, then for that space company, they're reaching their target audience. And that would be the same with any of the brands that then are activating or doing something with that company. These guys are looking for these really cool things that are going on in space, really want to know what's going on and do these things. So then for that company, then you have that channel. So we created this because we were working with Intuitive Machines on their sponsorship program. We were talking with a pretty large tech company, and they chose an F1 sponsorship over the Intuitive Machines sponsorship because all of the F1 they had changed. You spend the money for the sponsorship. Well, all of these channels are built out. You know what how many impressions you're going to have, how many conversions you're going to have. Prior, you have a good idea of that. Then you're able to measure the KPIs after, make sure the return was worth it on the spend, etc. But none of that's been established with the space economy. So that's kind of what Terraformers is attempting to do, is utilizing some of these blockchain technologies. Create these a channel for these space companies and their sponsors that work through.
I think one of the other big places that we expect to see impact, right, is in what's referred to as tokenization of assets, but it's really selling shares. If we talk about this in a traditional securities sense or a traditional trust sense, you're selling shares in something. You're selling an ownership slice of something. And so for space resources, that's an obvious one. As those resources are found, they can get registered, they can be created, because one of the things that blockchain does very well is the creation of new assets. There's a minting process that's created, so you can just register the new assets as they're discovered, effectively, and owned. And the other big one, I think, is going to be raising money. I mean, we have certainly seen a bunch of questionably compliant money raising done over the last several years in terms of initial coin offerings and other things that may or may not have been legal or compliant, or they certainly weren't compliant. And now we're starting to see the compliance rules come into place. So as we see those compliance rules come into place, I definitely think we're going to see companies raising money that way through registered offerings.
Is that I assume there's a risk management aspect to that, which is where the value comes from. That from an investor's perspective, they're seeing more confidence in where their funds are being applied. Is that really where the value is coming in?
Well, two things. One, we're seeing today in traditionally illiquid assets, like for example, like real estate developments can be $50 million, $200 million, and these are traditionally sold through syndication. The firm that's doing the development calls up their usual suspects, and their usual suspects each throw in $10 million. And then this pays off over, there are two kinds of big real estate investments. One is a construction real estate trust, and the other one is an operational real estate trust, where they're operating an existing development. And so these two investors don't tend to be the same people. Certain companies like to build things and get paid off over the next 5 years, and other companies like to get paid off over 20 years by the operation of the asset. So But these assets tend to be very, very illiquid. So we're starting to see the tokenization of those assets, both to make them smaller, so they're not $10 million clips, they're now $10,000 clips or $50,000 clips. Still institutional, still large, high net worth investments. They're not selling $10 worth of mall, right? They're selling $10,000 or $50,000 worth of mall, but still something. And also to make it more liquid, so you could sell it if you don't want it anymore. If you don't want that cash flow anymore, you could sell that cash flow. Or if you don't believe that the development is actually going to get finished on time, maybe you sell it early and go invest your money somewhere else. In terms of doing this in space, I think that there's likely to be an opportunity for big projects, again, infrastructure projects that are going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars, to raise money that way and buy and sell that way. That would be hard to do in traditional equity markets, but might be easier to do in a blockchain, tokenized market.
Well, actually, just since you mentioned like large projects like that, there is one, not necessarily on like in a commodities way, but is using blockchain as a way to build a large project. And in a way, it is commodities. It's information commodities, but it's called the Zai protocol. And what Zai protocol is doing, that's a geometric space project. And what those guys are doing is basically using their Zai protocol and their Zai token in blockchain to collect data. And it can be a huge range of data from different spacecraft, satellites, etc., into these data oracles. Okay, so they collect these in the data oracles, which you can then if you provide accurate information, that provider is rewarded with the Zai token. And if the data turns out to be good, they're rewarded with more. If it turns out to be iffy data, then they're rewarded with less or none. So then to be able to access that oracle, you need, and to query it, you need the Zai token to be able to access that. So then for the person who is providing that data, then you can sell that Zai token to which you're rewarded with to somebody who would find that data that they can query valuable. So they have that oracle, then they're then they're trying to build these meta oracles as well. Where the oracle you can just query data, but the meta oracle is something that you can have that is predictive. So instead of looking up they're querying the oracle, what was the weather on September 8th, 2023 versus what's the weather going to be on this day, which I don't know if that's actually possible for them to really predict the weather or not, but that's kind of what they're trying to do with the massive amounts of data, create predictive analysis, which then again you're using the blockchain to be able, the Zai protocol to be able to access.
So I want to pull back just a little bit. I was talking with Katie, who I got reintroduced to after several years, about the challenges of working with early stage technology startups, which I've done for the past 25 plus years of my career, and Katie's done. And one of the key things is trying to figure out, especially when you're developing a technology, how's it satisfying a need? And so one of the things that strikes me is whether there's a framework for thinking about which aspects of a technology-driven initiative, like new space type of activities, how do you think about which areas really show a need for these for distributed ledger, blockchain type of technologies? How do you think about it? How do you assess the potential value that the technology can bring against the costs that are imposed on it? And it's always a challenge when you've got a new technology to try to think that, and not try to just push it in and think that it's going to solve everything. We're really trying to understand the need. I don't know, Brian, how much you've thought about that. I mean,
yeah, certainly there are a number of advocates in the digital asset space who say that it solves all the problems, and I'm not one of those people. However, I think that there's a pretty reasonable argument that we've moved beyond the point of moving forklifts of shares from one side of New York City to the other. Like, it's not that long ago, 30 years ago, there were still forklifts that went onto trucks in the middle of the night and moved boxes full of shares from one depository location to another depository location in New York City. 75 or 100 years ago, there were armored cars that moved gold from one side, from New York to New York to the port, and then from the port to London. So we've kind of moved beyond that point already, and so I don't believe that cryptocurrency and blockchain solves all the problems. I think it solves far fewer problems than most of its advocates say that it solves. But I think that even among the big banks that are crypto skeptical, they all talk about tokenization of assets and the fact that these assets are going to be recorded on some digital ledger that is going to be easy to look at, and then all of the transfers of ownership are going to happen on this digital ledger. So if we think about where we're going to be 10 years from now, most people believe that most assets are going to be transferred digitally.
So it needs a technology base to do that. Now, you're thinking more than 10 years. I think in some of the stuff that you and I were talking about earlier today. What have you seen that may be emerging, not 10 years, 25 years, 50 years from now, where technology such as blockchain could help to really enable it?
Yeah. So 25, 50 years from now, it really depending on if people want to make this type of shift, would just be kind of just a wholly new and decentralized way of kind of just going about their day-to-day life and day-to-day business. So I'll give you an example, and this is actually happening right now. This is with another one of our partners doing the no-clip satellite. Separate from the satellite, though, these guys are creating pieces of components that can be used, robotic components, and putting it on the blockchain as a CAD file. Okay, so basically, what these guys are doing here is, they're able to put on the blockchain all these different CAD files of components, and then someone who's going to be like, let's say at home, instead of and this honestly might be just more niche for engineers who are interested in this, but you can basically piece together a robot that you'd be able to 3D print in your home with all the pieces 3D printed that you would take off of the blockchain, and you buy it, you transact the rights to be able to print it through blockchain, and piece together, let's say your cleaning robot, or let's say that your robot's leg broke and you need to print off a new one. Well, that model of leg you didn't like, so now you're going on this this exchange to buy to find a better rated leg that you can then buy the rights to 3D print and replace your leg, the robot's leg with. So really, it just really depends on how far down that rabbit hole everybody wants to go with decentralization.
You can get very far down the rabbit hole. And that's, I think we want to open it up to questions from people, to see how they're thinking about it. I mean, my brain's scrambled trying to think deeply about it, but we got a couple experts here, so what questions do you
Well, I
have?
don't know if I have a question, but I don't want that. I don't want that. It sits too close to the hotspot this way. The people have talked about putting specifications and CAD files on the blockchain. If you were to blockchain like the universe, it grows too fast. The fact that it works with financial transactions is they're small in terms of the number of bits or how much memory they take. You put a CAD file on there, or you start putting video on there, the blockchain is way too freaking huge.
Yeah, mostly the solutions to that remain that what the blockchain records is ownership or rights to something.
Well, no, but you just...
So
I'm aware. Yeah, I hear you, but like where we're seeing this really happen is we're seeing this with things like registries of ownership.
It's fine if it's a pointer to a file.
Yeah,
then
that's
get
what I was about to say.
Okay,
Yeah.
Then my question was me. Thank you.
But no, people are doing that, and you're right. It's very inefficient because as I said at the very beginning, distributed ledgers are not the most efficient distributed databases, right? They're in fact very inefficient as distributed databases from that standpoint. So you're 100% correct.
So with respect to the security and non-repudiation of the blockchain, I was recently told by somebody that there was a concern that for Earth observation data being generated by satellites, that might be hacked into by malicious actors. And they were suggesting that blockchain would be a technology that could prevent the data from being corrupted. Is that something that makes sense to you, or is that?
So I'll say a couple of things about the security of a blockchain. One of them is that a blockchain may be a reasonable place to put checksums or other sort of verification capabilities. So you could create those, and you could say the image that was created, like we take an image every minute, for example. I could give a signature for each of those and put those on the blockchain, and you could always go back and look at it, just like you sign software. In fact, the same algorithms, the same cryptographic algorithms that you use to sign files. So you could sign the data and put the signature on the blockchain. The signature is small. It's 256 bits, 512 bits. It's not large, right? And then you could go back and verify that the data that is on the main storage mechanism, Google Drive or the company's ledger, whatever it is, matches what was printed at the time. So that's certainly possible. Another thing, though, that we see with the proliferation of different blockchains is we see a problem in what's called a 51% attack. Almost all blockchains are at risk of anyone who controls the majority of the network can rewrite history and effectively make old history disappear. Not completely, but mostly. So that we absolutely see in less liquid blockchains, there are probably too many blockchains right now because we probably need a relatively small number that have all the capabilities that we want, and then we need to do the things we need to do on that relatively small number of blockchains so that they're not subject to what's called a 51% attack where you could rewrite history.
So my question comes from my accepted position as a cynic. Not a big believer in the blockchain. Watched a lot of the hype cycle, and it kind of feels almost like the 3D movies. This is the time it's going to take off. This is the time it's going to take off. And so we've seen that in other technologies. I like to think of personal computers. We had the Wozniaks that were saying, "Hey, this is cool tech. This is all the great stuff it can do." And then it took the Steve Jobs that finally that's in all of our pockets. So it hasn't seemed that Elon Musk or some of the other recent players have given that waterfall effect. But he brought up some great ideas here tonight of things that, hey, this can move blockchain from the Bitcoin and NFT problems it's had to a wider adoption. In your best guess, what type of mass adoption or mass effect would finally move it from 3D movies to, yeah, we absolutely use this to build society?
So I think it depends on which blockchain we're talking about. I'll just talk about Bitcoin because I think that's going to be the first one that has mass adoption. So yeah, how Bitcoin works is it's basically an autonomous banking system. Okay, so you have people verifying transactions, and you get value moved, and depending on what people are valuing that token at that time, that's how much value you're transmitting. And what's unique about Bitcoin is that it is you would need significant amount of computing power to have a 51% attack on that. You need like all the United States, China, Russia, India, some other countries coordinating to have a 51% attack on that and be successful. So Bitcoin in itself is the only autonomous, decentralized banking system in the world that will ever happen. Anything else that tries to become Bitcoin will have a 51% attack on it. If it was going to get to that point, I mean, it's an anomaly, really, that we have this. So if there's going to be a point where there's a tipping point, at least for Bitcoin specifically, it's our fiat currencies having a crisis. And our fiat currencies are, I think we printed, I don't know the exact number, but between 2020, during 2020, we printed a very significant amount of our money supply. I think it was over half of what was currently in circulation. So it seems like we've somehow navigated around that, but who knows? And not so much yet, because obviously BRICS is becoming starting to become a player between exchange between the BRICS nations using their currencies. So this could be something where we have a fiat crisis and people need to kind of have something else that isn't just dependent on a centralized government issuing currency which has value because the monopoly on violence says it has value. So it's an alternative there where people can, it not necessarily is going to replace fiat currency, but is going to give an opportunity to have a different option if there's a crisis or fiat in general becomes weaker across the board.
So I too am a crypto skeptic. Despite the fact that I run a 7-figure business that does this, unless crypto has an impact on the real world, it's just internet money. It's just fake internet money. Okay? And I think that we've seen a lot of that. I mean, I have people call me up and say, "Can you help us with our meme coin?" And meme coins are okay up to a point. If somebody wants to know that they're investing in a meme and it's going to go away and it's going to be eventually worth nothing and you want to have fun with that, okay, fine, you have fun with that. But is that an investment in that sense? No, it's a trend. It's a short-term trend and it goes away, it's done. But we are seeing increasing payments flows around the world, massively increasing payments flows around the world. In the 1980s, this system called SWIFT was created to replace the old manual system of international wires. In the 1990s, everybody finally agreed that SWIFT was better than the old way of doing things, and the banks started finally implementing it. I mean, it took a decade between when the standard was written and when the banks finally agreed that they would all, okay, fine, we'll all move into this. So in the 1990s, I helped implement SWIFT at some of the biggest banks in the world. And SWIFT, it's a funny acronym, right? It's way faster than what it replaced, but it's not actually fast. It can take 5 days or more to do an international wire, which is better than a month. So we should all be happy that it's better than a month. But I can move millions of dollars around the world in minutes. ranging anywhere, depending on what blockchain we're talking about, anywhere from seconds to maybe 30 minutes. And it's done. And we do, routinely. So that is paying attention. Like we had money we had to move after the wire network closed today. So we flipped it into stable coins, we sent the stable coins, we flipped it back into currency at another bank elsewhere in the world, and it was done. And it was done when there was no wire system anywhere in the world to move it. So we're seeing that actually have real impact on the real economy, and that's going to continue. Now, tokenization of assets, maybe, I don't know, we'll see, but it's also growing. I think Dave's coming around.
I'm going with questions.
Okay, great, then just hand it back.
Great. I have a question, a mechanical question about how blockchain kind of does its work. I understand that it's a distributed model, but I have also heard that it's very energy intensive. And so I have two questions. One, again, I'm ignorant of kind of where that computation is conducted, but one, does it matter? Like David, you talked about how
That's David, I'm Brian.
Sorry, oh yeah, sorry Brian. The DAO model, they're all registered in different states because they want to observe those laws. So does it matter where the blockchain is actually being computed? And then is there then, when you're talking about space, is there any incentive to then have those computations conducted out of orbit in an international or non-nation, under no nation?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is that depending on which blockchain we're talking about, they are either more or less energy efficient. So like Bitcoin, despite its dominance, is actually very energy inefficient. And it was designed to get exponentially more difficult to calculate on. So if anything is going to ultimately cause a problem for Bitcoin's dominance as a store of value, it's going to be that expense of dealing with those transactions. But the way every blockchain works is through a process that's called public-private key cryptography, where you hold your private key and you have a public key as well that's known. And so that public key is your address. So anybody who wants to send you money sends it to your address, which is associated with your public key. But for you to sign a transaction, you have to use your private key. So think of it like opening up your safe with the key, and taking out the wax seal that you stick on the envelope, right, to say, I promise that this happened, right? So that's fundamentally what the private key does. So all of these transactions are verified via a private key signature, and then they're recorded on the blockchain. So how expensive or cheap it is to record that on the blockchain is the efficiency part, and how that gets validated by the rest of the network.
And so, the two main ways to validate are proof of work and proof of stake. So proof of work is actually using electricity to find, to solve the puzzle, basically, to verify that, okay, this is the validating node. That, you find the puzzle, you become the validating node, and there's multiple of them, and they through consensus say this is true, and then it adds another block to that chain, and that's unchangeable. The other way is through proof of work, and that's when you lock up that network's cryptocurrency in proof of stake. My gosh, proof of stake is when you lock up that network's cryptocurrency. Certain amount, I think Ethereum's like 28, and so you lock that up and you validate the authenticity of transactions, and if you're found to be providing false information, then you lose your cryptocurrency, in the Ethereum proof of stake model. So that way is obviously less energy intensive because they're not actively using electricity to validate.
So if I'm hearing you both correctly, the computational energy is only happening in between the two people.
No, like
Doing a
you
transaction.
sign your transaction and you put it out there. So I sign my transaction and put it out there. And then the network validates that transaction. And so there are a couple different algorithms for how to validate that transaction. Or how to decide who validates that transaction. Really, the validation is actually quite simple. It's in a proof of work model, the miner, you've heard about cryptocurrency miners, the miners are competing for the right to validate those transactions. And they're doing that by solving really hard mathematical puzzles. And so that's what's really expensive, that you have to have banks and banks of computers to do that. In a proof of stake model, it's more like signing a proxy agreement for your shares of a company. In that you say, I'm going to let Coinbase vote my shares for me, and then they will validate transactions on the Ethereum blockchain.
The transactions, it's not a single transaction for each block. It's multiple transactions. It's huge. It's batches.
I don't want to, make this drag out this conversation forever, but so then that general ledger is housed where?
It's everywhere. There are copies.
Okay,
It's
so there's
distributed.
copies, yeah.
There are copies everywhere. Everyone has a copy.
Yep, and then there's even ledgers on top of the main ledgers that transact a lot of things and then verify through one of the main ledger's transactions. So like Polygon, for example, is a blockchain on top of the Ethereum blockchain, and it's a lot quicker and a lot less expensive because of how the technology works, but the security it attaches itself to a Ethereum block. So all this stuff that goes on in the Polygon network is then recorded on an Ethereum block. So you can get pretty deep into it, but
And again, that's for efficiency.
yeah.
So there are these
Yep.
side chains that are done to make things more efficient rather than less.
Okay. You have a question?
I did. One of the larger conversations that I heard as a person who doesn't have a lot of experience in understanding blockchain or how it works is that there's an environmental impact. So if we're going to scale, and I'm not sure if that's actually true or not, but if this kind of stuff is going to scale up to incorporate kind of this decentralized idea of banking as the world's economy becomes more of the world's economy and less about the U.S. dollar, and as we move blockchain into figuring out how to implement things in space, is there an environmental issue with the energy required to do this?
There is and there isn't. Certainly Bitcoin and any proof of work blockchain are very expensive from an electricity standpoint to calculate on. In comparison to a number of other economic activities that use electricity, it's not actually that big. It's still relatively small. But Bitcoin by design is getting exponentially more complicated to calculate on. So I'm sensitive to that, but I also know that we waste a lot of electricity on a lot of other things, much more than we waste on Bitcoin today. So I think, and then if we look at what are called the proof of stake chains, the whole idea of proof of stake was designed to eliminate that problem. And there are a whole bunch of other blockchains that have been specifically designed to be more efficient to calculate. So Bitcoin was first, and so Bitcoin dominates in part because it was the first mover. Will it remain the dominant player? I don't know. It's unclear to me. And partly because of its inefficiency to calculate on.
And just to that point, there's a company called Space Chain, which their whole concept was to deploy mining nodes on satellites in space for two reasons. One is that in space, energy is relatively free because you just put out solar panels and collect solar energy. And the other thing is, by being on a satellite in space, it's relatively inaccessible. so it was more secure.
I think we've got one more question looking at the time, so let's wrap up with this.
Is the environmental concerns around the energy use of blockchain the energy use itself, or the heat that is created from all the servers that then requires very cool environments which require more electricity? I'm familiar with some large tech companies that are putting server farms in the ocean as a way to deal with the heat that's generated so that the AC is not required. So above ground is kind of a double whammy from an energy perspective. Is that where the environmental concern comes from?
I think it's a lot of things. It's kind of the overall impact ultimately, like what percentage of the energy is used, what percentage of additional energy has to be used for cooling. Although we're starting to see people, like even several years ago, we would work with companies to do mining in what's called the short loop around a power plant to use power that was generated but would have been thrown away anyway, because there was no place to put it on the grid. Or we're seeing a number of companies start to use that waste heat for other things. Using it to generate more power, to recapture some of that, using it to store thermal energy. So we're definitely seeing moves to make that more efficient, but I don't think it's a settled problem. And again, the exponentially increasing difficulty is going to continue to cause people a lot of heartburn.
I also think it depends where in the world that these Bitcoin validators are being ran. So if it's in China, then obviously Chinese energy is not nearly as clean as, U.S. or European energy. So depending on where it is and what the actual source of energy is also needs to be factored in.
Well, I think the panel tonight proved what I've actually thought about this technology since I've been exposed to it the last 5 or 6 years, which is, of the last 30 years that I've been working in different new and emerging technologies, this one probably is the most obtuse and multifaceted and difficult to kind of comprehend that I've run across.
And people are still figuring it out, right?
People are still figuring it out, but to me, that's the opportunity. And there's going to be solutions that are found in commercial space, just like there are in other areas as well. And it's going to be fascinating to watch. I just don't have a clue as to where it is, but thank you so much. I'm really
Terraformer Space Adventures.
There you go. I appreciate your time and expertise.
And if you guys are interested, we're going to be doing our beta group for Terraformers. We're going to start them in July 12th. So if you guys would like to, I'm going to leave a sheet out in the back, and you can put your email down. And you'll have to have a MetaMask wallet. So it might be a difficult onboarding process, but we can work through it.
A little bit more than giving your email on a website, huh?
Yeah, a little bit more.
It's not better.
Thank you very much, Zach. Thanks, Brian. And we'll be around to network afterwards.